Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another Classical Crossover Magazine interview. Today is a real treat for me because it's someone I've done virtually. We did over email interview a long time ago, but I feel like she's just someone I've admired for so long. So I'm really excited to chat with Jennifer Thomas. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Natasha. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm so good. I'm so excited because I feel like your stories on social media, I look forward to them. They're so relatable, and I feel like I'm always
Oh my
following
gosh.
you.
You're so sweet. Thank you.
So of course we're gonna, talk about you have this amazing new release out, and I'll share that on the screen in a minute. But what we'd like to do first is kind of go right back to the beginning. So would you mind, Jennifer, taking us to how did this journey begin for you?
Yes. So are you talking about like my life or just this album?
Let's go life first, and then we'll go album.
Okay. Um, yeah, so I started learning violin and piano when I was 5, and my mom taught me. And I came from a really musical family. I have 3 brothers, and we all grew up playing 2 different instruments and heavily practicing heavily in that world with my mom. Um, and eventually I went to college and studied piano there and played violin in the orchestra and very immersed in the classical world. That's like
Mm.
all that I really knew. Um, and it wasn't until after I had graduated from college and was trying to figure out my way in the world. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Excuse me. By the way, I've been sick, so I apologize to any listeners.
No
Um,
worries.
my voice is like I sound like a frog. But yeah, so after college, I'd never composed or anything. I worked for the Seattle Symphony for a while in their education department, which was an amazing experience because I got to attend a lot of concerts and meet a lot of artists like Itzhak
Mm.
Perlman and Lang Lang and Joshua Bell and just so many amazing people that I looked up to. And it was actually in my off time working there because there was this little recital hall that I would just go in on my breaks and just play and piddle around with. And I started writing my own music while I was working there. And yeah, after that, a few years later, I released my first album, and that kind of started everything. So
Can I ask you, so I did some piano in college. We had like, of course, a level we had to pass. But on the vocal side, we have very specific requirements. It's like,
mhm.
okay, so now you need to do your German lieder, and now you need to do some French art songs. And what is that kind of like for you on the piano side, in that classical tradition? Is it just certain composers, or what are some of the kind of rules that you were expected to follow?
Yeah, very similar. We had to learn the different my brain is not working today. The different eras of music, so Baroque,
Yeah.
classical, romantic, 20th century. We had to, you know, always do repertoire from all of those. But when I was in college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do at that
Mhm.
point. I feel like I was just I don't know. I wanted to do performance, but I didn't want the joy to be sucked out of it for me because I
Yeah.
felt like if it becomes a requirement, then I'm not going to want to do it anymore. And so I kind of went the pedagogy route and concentrated on like teaching, which is so crazy because I don't do teaching anymore and it's not something I ever like super loved, but I was just so afraid of like it stealing my joy out of performance. So I decided to like concentrate on pedagogy, but on
Mhm.
like the side, I did all of the stuff that all the performance majors were doing. I just didn't feel the pressure to like have to like have a grade with them, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense.
That completely makes sense. And I think too, when you kind of work with different people from the pedagogy background, I just love how their mind works. I don't know if you feel the same way. It's like understanding the whole science of it rather being like, okay, you must do. I don't know. There's just a little
Right.
bit more freedom and method to it. I really enjoy that side of it.
Yeah.
Uh, but let's talk about, so okay, so you start composing and that just opens up this whole new world. You mentioned your first album. So what was that like? Like, how did you get your inspiration for your first song? How did that begin?
Yeah, so I I've always loved like my inspiration growing up was a lot of film scores. and also classical music, but also I was really as a pianist, I was really into some of the new age artists that were really popular when I was a teen, like George Winston and David Lanz and Michael Gettle. And I would just play those as like my fun pieces outside of the classical stuff I was learning. And so when I started writing my own music, I don't know, I just took this approach of like, what do I want to hear? What do I want to play? And I really didn't know what I was doing, because with a classical background, it was just very structured and very like, you must do this, you must do this. And to have the freedom to actually write stuff, it almost was like, well, can someone just tell me what to do? Because I don't really know. So it was definitely like a learning process. My first album, I'm very proud of it, but it was also like such a learning experience. And I look back on the tracks on there and I feel like I've grown so much since that album. And I don't know about you, but sometimes when you go back and listen to your early work, it's like embarrassing, because you're like, whoa, I wrote that.
Yeah, the perception, like the time you think you're really cool, and then when you go back and you're just like, oh my goodness, please hide myself. But you're saying there to me is so interesting, because I feel like in theory class we have certain rules, right? Okay, you have to use these particular chords, you cannot use these. But we've kind of done that retrospectively, because obviously the composers were breaking ground as they were doing things. And now it's become very sacred, where you can't change anything. So let's talk about now this album, because this album is going back to your classical roots, but you're approaching it with all this experience of having been a composer now of your own, and doing your own thing. So what's that like to now reimagine these classics?
Yeah. So to be totally like honest, like I was really nervous to do this. Because in my music career now, I'm always in that in-between battle between the classical world and the cinematic world, and what's acceptable in either. And it's been a really tough spot to be in, because if I lean too classical, then I lose interest in the cinema world. If I go too pop or cinema, then I get a lot of criticism from the classical purists. And so when I was planning to do these, because this is just volume 1, I'm going to do some more volumes as well, but like this was kind of like my tester to see how it does. But I was really nervous, because I was getting comments from purists who were like, well, I'm really scared to hear what you're going to do, because like are you going to ruin the classics? And there's just, I don't know, but my whole goal with this album honestly was I just really wanted to bridge a gap between the two worlds, because I feel like I love classical music, but I also understand why a lot of people are afraid to listen to it, because there's a stigma around it for a lot of people. And I just wanted to create something that was kind of a softer landing to introduce people into the classical world, where like maybe it's not like so rigid. And I took a lot of the pieces that I did on this little album and just, I don't know. So for example, I have Moonlight Sonata, and Moonlight Sonata traditionally is in 3 movements, and they're very long and lengthy. And I kind of just combined everything into 6 minutes and took the best of the different movements and made it more digestible for someone who maybe doesn't want to sit down and listen to an entire 3 movement sonata. And I was just, that's all I was trying to do. And so far the feedback has been really great. In fact, some of my classical purist friends, one, she emailed me or messaged me the other day, and she was like, I finally listened, and I would recommend this to any of my purist friends.
Oh, wow,
like,
nice.
It's so good, and I hope you change the world. And I was like, oh my gosh, because I'm so nervous for that feedback more than the non-classical. So
It's true. It's very daunting to, I feel like even though now I've gone so different, like, because this is my focus as crossover, is talking to all these people, you still kind of think back to your professors and their approach and wanting to get that approval. But it's almost, I don't know if you feel the same, Jennifer. I feel like as the classical periods progress, like the very modern music, for our listeners, there's something called like 4 minutes. What was it? 4 minutes and 25 seconds, I think is the name of it. And like classical music had got to the point where it was just kind of like, let's put a bunch of things on stage, or let's just be silent and see what happens. And I think like cinema is so classically based. I know people don't they want to consider it differently. But I think there is, like you're saying, there is this natural connection anyways, and anything we can do to kind of bring them closer is only going to help both.
Yeah. I totally agree. And there is like, and you'd be surprised when you look up the bios and history and education of a lot of the film's composers, like John Williams, for example. He's like, if you look into the structure of like Harry Potter score or any of the scores he's written, you can hear his classical training and just the theory behind how he writes his music. But then also in the film world, there's composers who've had no training at all,
Mhm.
and they write the most amazing music. I mean, like Hans Zimmer came from a pop band in the 90s, and he, he's one of the top film composers now, like the most in demand, and everyone knows who he is, but he doesn't have a classical background per se. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
I think it's also maybe some fear, like sometimes, oh, it's popular, it's not going to be quality. But I think with everything, you can have opera and it can be terrible, and
Yeah.
you can have pop and it's amazing. So it's the quality that you produce, and I think that's something you've always. It seems like you've always been very careful is quality over quantity, um,
Yes.
regardless.
100%.
So yeah, it's something I appreciate, and even some of it I don't understand. I know you do like high, what is it, audio that's like high
Oh,
resilience.
high res. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's
Yeah. Yeah, that's only been in the last few years, and it's going to be like more and more popular as time goes by. And my album that I'm working on, the Oceans album I'll release next year, I'm doing spatial audio mixing, which I don't know if,
okay.
well, maybe if the listeners haven't discovered that yet, it's fairly new. Like you can get it on Tidal and some other apps, but basically, so after I finish all of the mastering process for the regular album,
Yeah.
we do an entirely different mastering where we take the masters and we split them into 27 different speaker arrangements.
Oh
So
wow.
you can basically listen and be walking and you get like a very like way better than even like 7.1 Dolby audio like stereo experience in your headphones. And you sound like you can sound, or you can listen to a piece of music and it'll sound like you're at the conductor's podium with the orchestra all around
Oh
you.
wow.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's this new technology, and that'll be my first album with spatial mixing, so I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's crazy the things that like are possible now. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
curious a little bit. When you compose, I assume that you do a lot of it digitally now. Is that correct?
I do both.
Okay.
It depends on what I'm working on. I usually start at my piano, which these are just my keyboards, but in the house I have my piano. And then I'll bring it out here to my studio and start laying down different layers and things. But yeah, it just depends because also with composing, there's so many awesome sound libraries now with cool sounds, and
Mhm.
those can inspire compositions too, like starting out with the libraries and then building on those as well. So it's a mix of both, yeah.
I'm curious, Jennifer, do you kind of discipline yourself to say, like, these 2 hours a day, I'm going to try to compose? Or is it more kind of like, okay, I have a melody in my head. Here's a napkin. Let me do it. You know, like, how does that work for you?
Yeah, I wish I was that. I wish I had time to just set aside 2 hours a day to do, practicing or composing. It's usually just like project based. Like
Yeah.
I have this project that I'm working on, so my whole world at that time is all like based on like production or editing. Or the next 2 weeks I'm going to be at my piano composing because I need to come up with the melody structures and things. But yeah, it's hard for my brain, at least. I don't know if it's this way for you or other artists, but it's hard to just like flip flop in between and do like 10 different things in one day. I need 8 hours to like work
Yes.
work on this one thing.
That's true. I feel like, and more being, especially an indie musician, it requires different things for you. So you not only have
Yeah.
to record music, now you have to be like your production engineer, you have to be a social media manager. Um,
Yeah.
so one thing that you have developed, and maybe it comes out of that love for film, is this filmmaking ability. And I think some of your videos, they've been entered into festivals, they've done really well. So
Thank
how
you.
did that begin for you? Were you like just wanting to make films, or is it something that came out of necessity from your music?
Um I've always been a storyteller.
Yeah.
So even as a kid, I remember being a kid and we had this house. I had a forest behind our house, and my dad built me a swing on a tree. And I would disappear into the woods for like hours and just like in this tree swing and just I mean, it sounds crazy. I would just make up stories and like out loud come up with these stories and build on them. I'd be there for hours. And I do the same thing with my kids now too. At bedtime, we have this thing where one person's in charge with coming up with the place, someone's in charge of the characters, and then one person's in charge of starting the story. And we build on these
Mm.
stories, and we'll have a story going on for months at bedtime where we just continue the story every night. Excuse me. So I love telling stories, and in the beginning with my music, like in my YouTube channel, I started years and years ago, like 2007, I think. It was just kind of in the beginning a means to do music videos and share my music with people who couldn't come live or whatever. But it's definitely evolved into something where I now am taking a more like filmmaker approach, like
Mm.
creatively coming up with storylines and creating, especially for my upcoming album for next year. I have a lot of films I'll be releasing with that ocean or ocean that album in particular. But I just
Yeah.
love it. I love it. Like along with music, I love creating a palette of sensory experiences to go along with the music and not just listening
Mhm.
to it. Yeah, it's fun.
And I think it's really important now because I think like Spotify just has such a huge catalog that when you kind
Yeah.
of have one of these visual journeys to take audiences on, it can really capture people. I think your latest video was Etude for a Dreamer. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that one was like pulling in different fairy tales, and that was just very visually stunning.
Thank you. That was a lot of work, but it was
Oh,
really it
sure.
was really fun. Yeah, yeah. That one, yep, that one. I don't know what to say about it, but it was a lot of work.
Do you tend to storyboard it, Jennifer? Like, because I'm assuming these are all your ideas. You're producing it. You're creatively the mind behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, I will storyboard out ideas before, and have everything laid out in pre-production and have shot lists. My husband does cinematography on most of my projects. I do have videos that I've done with other crews, which have been amazing, like The Fire Within. But yeah, it's a lot of preparation and just having everything ready to go when we go to shoot, and then the more you can prepare beforehand helps you in the editing afterwards. So you're not like in the editing realizing, oh, I forgot to get this shot, or we have to go back and reshoot this thing, or yeah. But I love it. It's all creative, and I just
Yeah.
love creating.
I guess when you're taking on a project like this, first of all, can you give me an idea of like the timeline? Like, how long did Classical Reimagined take to put together?
So this one was definitely a shorter, faster project for me just because it was mostly solo piano, whereas
Okay.
my normal music is like heavily orchestrated, heavily produced. For example, my Oceans album, each track has, between 300 and 500 stems to mix.
Wow.
Yeah, we've got orchestra, choir, multiple pianos, like all that. But for this classical reimagined, it's just basically me at the piano. There's two tracks where I layered piano effects, but I would say from start to finish, um, it was probably like 4 months. So it wasn't too difficult, and it's also much easier for me to write arrangements of classical music because it's just like in me than
Hmm.
like coming up with original work, which takes so much more like figuring out. And I don't know, it's nice to have a melody that's already written for you and you can just figure out how to make it in your own style.
For sure. One of the tracks that was interesting to me was Jennifer's Fugue. Um, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I wonder if a lot of people understand what a fugue is. So would you be able to explain a little bit? Because there's such complicated pieces of music.
Yeah, well, I put that one right after the Bach prelude on the album, and typically, like with Bach preludes, he always has a prelude and a fugue. And
Yeah.
I didn't do the fugue that goes with that prelude, but I wrote my own fugue. And basically what a fugue is it has one part that starts and then another part that comes in, and like one hand might be doing something, the other hand does something different, and it's just two things going on at the same time. That
Yeah,
yeah.
that's what
I
makes it crazy to play. I feel like Bach, because it's like these melodies, whereas I guess the other times the other piano is more supportive. Does that kind of make sense? With
yeah,
like they're
I
kind of
normally
working together.
yeah, you have like your melody and then your left hand is chords or arpeggios. But with fugue, your left hand is also extremely busy with your right hand, and it's like a mind splitting of hands. Like I have to now concentrate on both hands, and yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool that you had your own. Just just knowing the process. I admire composers so much. I'm trying
Thank
to
you.
learn, and wow, it's not easy.
Oh, thanks.
So let's talk a little bit about just how you keep balance, Jennifer, because I feel like you are really honest in your stories about your life and different things, but you're involved in every part of the process, right? Like the pictures, you said you enjoy Photoshop, you're involved with getting costumes. So how do you
Yeah.
kind of keep a balance between, okay, I have to be a person, I have to be a mom, I have to be, a wife, and then also I'm a
Yeah.
musician.
No, this is a really good question. I have several other women artist friends who either are just now like entering motherhood, or, they have young kids, and they're like, how are you doing this? Like, I'm going crazy. Like, I can't even find time to, record or whatever. And I want to say, like, yeah, when your kids are really young, that was hard for me too. Like, and don't be hard on yourself. Anyone listening, like, don't be hard on yourself if you
Mm,
are an artist and you're trying to juggle parenthood, or, even just your pets. Like, if your pets are your children, I know that can be a lot too. Like, it's a lot. And you just be nice to yourself and have grace for yourself, and just realize that there's different seasons and it does get easier. So like I'm in a season now where my kids are now 15, 13, and 9,
mhm.
and they're very self-sufficient, and I don't have to like do so much for them anymore, which opens up a lot of time for both my husband and I. He's my partner in my music. He takes on a lot of roles that help me as well, so I don't have to do everything. um but yeah, it's definitely just a balancing act every day. And um, my kids have also grown up with me doing this, which I think
Mhm.
makes a difference. So they know that if I'm working in my studio, uh, they need to respect that time. I mean,
Yeah,
they're free. They can come out here and hang out or ask questions, but they usually know that mom's working, and yeah.
give her a little time.
Yeah.
But what you're saying about like kind of having grace, I feel like even just for yourself, because you need some time by yourself to just
Yeah.
get a little bit back of what you're giving out. So do you have any kind of like self-care things you do, Jennifer? Maybe like 20 minutes alone for a walk or something?
Yeah, I try to get outside and walk most days. And also, I just love watching movies and
Mhm.
shows, and that's kind of a release for me.
Yeah.
Because I feel like when you're a creative person, there is so much mental output going out all the time. And it's just nice to just not mentally like have to focus on something. So I have, several shows that I love to watch. Like, I'll say it, I really love The Bachelor because it's just mindless
Yes.
TV that I don't have to like, it's like someone else's drama, not my own. um, yeah, I don't know. So walking outdoors, films, just getting like quiet audio time,
Yeah.
like the audio thing. It's like just like I just don't want to hear voices. I don't want to hear music. I just need like nothing.
I completely get both the listening to really interesting shows, 90 Day Fiance, and then just I feel like I can't, because we're so focused on music. It's
Mhm.
hard to like have multiple things going on at once. So if I'm like
Yeah.
listening to an audiobook and then my husband comes to talk to me, it's overload. I
Oh,
can't do it.
same here. Yeah, I can't do it. And I don't know if it's different for you, because as an instrumentalist too, because the music that most of the music I do, is non-lyrical. It's all
Yeah.
instrumental. And so, like, for me, if I'm trying to get something done and I'm listening to music that has words, like if someone is, even if it's just singing, it's the words, I can't mentally
Yeah.
focus on the task at hand.
It's hard because you almost kind of have to find music that you're like you like, but you're not super interested in, because otherwise you're if you're trying to sleep and you're like, let me relax, and you're like, oh, this is a really good passage. How
I
are you
know,
gonna
and then you start listening. Like, "Oh, I love this." Yeah.
So tell me, Jennifer, the one thing I have to bring up, it's not related to this album, but I have a passion for watching figure skating. So it's been so cool to just tune on, I think, the last couple of years and hear your music. I'm curious what that was like for you the first time you heard someone skating to your music.
Yeah, the first time I think was 2015. Someone used it in the US Figure Skating Championships, and I was just, like, enamored. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this." And now it just kinda seems like old hat, like, every season there's, like, 25 skaters using my music now, so it's not as, like I'll get people saying, "Oh, did you hear so and so skated your music?" I'm like, "Yep." So it's not as exciting as it was in the beginning, but it is still like, I love it every single time, though. It's just, I love it. I love seeing what other artists do with my art.
Mm.
It's just, I love to see the dance interpretation, how they edit the music, and I love to also watch how people respond to it, because music is such a huge part of figure skating. Like, they can't do what they do without the music, and so it's just interesting to watch that.
Yeah, I think that's one part that intrigued me. Obviously, you've been like candid on social media, like, no, they're not paying me for whatever, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you just hear it places. But I think the cuts, that must be very kind of strange to listen to the places where people choose to cut your songs.
Yeah, sometimes it's really good, and sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe that wasn't the best choice." But yeah, it's not up to me. It's just whatever works for their routine, so
But no, that's super cool. And I think the biggest venue is you've been at the Olympics. Is it twice now? Because I think maybe Alyssa Leo, Rika Kahira, and then gymnastics as well. I'm not sure who from.
yeah, the Winter and the Summer Olympics for figure skating and gymnastics. So that was really exciting. Yeah, and it was, Karen Chen, and
Okay,
yeah, Alyssa Liu was there, but she didn't skate to my music for the Olympics, but yeah.
got it. Okay, so I have a question for you now. Obviously, you've been in this for some time. I was going back to your Spotify catalog, and I was like, oh yeah, this album's from 2012. That was just like yesterday,
I
and
know.
I'm in that phase where I'm realizing, oh wow, it's actually like years ago that these things came out. So,
Totally.
do you think your interest in music has changed in different ways? Like maybe you're more interested in filmmaking or mixing or something now that you've done these things for such a long time.
Yeah, I have a pretty eclectic taste in music, but yeah, I think I definitely am more nowadays more interested in the cinematic side of music.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know, there's I love emotional music. So if it really stirs something within me, that's what I'm usually drawn to. Um, but yeah, I would say my earlier music was probably a little bit more classical in some ways, just because that's the world I came from, and maybe even more new age influenced, because as I said earlier, I really
Yeah.
loved like George Winston and those pianists. So, but yeah, it's fun though as an artist to like watch yourself evolve, because like I look at the music I'm writing now, and I feel like I'm finally like figuring out my groove and like what I really gravitate towards and what I love.
I think that period of finding your voice takes a long time. I'm still in it. As a
Yeah.
vocalist, I feel like I still haven't found my sound. So I know you mentioned you don't actively aren't part of like education right now, but you worked at a university, I believe. So knowing what you know now, if you had a young artist that was coming up, kind of like you were, would you have any advice to that for that person?
Yeah. And I often just kind of like look back at my own trajectory. And if
Mhm.
I could even go back and give myself advice, it's just always to do what makes you happy and what
Mhm.
you actually really want to do. I think, especially in the education department and education environment, you can get pigeonholed into something or boxed into something because that's the rules, or that's what, that's the program they have in the college and there's no other choice. And I understand that, but if you have a choice to like really do what you want to do, I would just say follow that. It'll just make you happier in the long run, follow your heart and don't be afraid to do something different is my biggest advice.
I like that. Is the phrase like something about women who follow the rules rarely make history or something like that?
I've heard that. I love that quote. It's such a good one, and it's so true.
It's true. We always remember the rule breakers, right? So
Yeah.
you mentioned oceans. I think we'll leave it here because I know you've got a busy day ahead of you, but I'm just curious of what's next because you have oceans and then also different little film projects, right? So for each of your music videos, that's a whole film project. So can you kind of share maybe what's up next for Jennifer?
Yeah. Oceans is a project I've actually been working like over 4 years on, and it's going to be the biggest, most epic album I've ever released to this date. It's just been a
Amazing.
massive undertaking. We recorded at Abbey Road earlier this year, sorry. And we're now like mixing all of the tracks together. And I've also been doing lots of filming. There's going to be 7 or 8 music videos that will come out with that album, all very story based. And yeah, so that is a work in progress. I might have some concerts in conjunction with the album next year, but that's still in the planning, talking phase. And then I'm also working on, I'm a new artist with Audio Network out of London, which is production music for film and TV. And so
Oh, wow.
that is actually my biggest deadline right now, is I need to get that finished by the end of December.
Okay, no pressure.
No pressure. Yeah.
Well, that all sounds amazing. I'm very excited to see what comes next.
Thank you.
Want to quickly flash this up here. So we have Classical Reimagined. Of course, it's available to stream. Do you also have physical copies, Jennifer?
I do. You can order from my website, which is jenniferthomasmusic.com.
Perfect. Well, I hope everyone will go out and support. Thank you so much for coming to chat with me. It's just been a treat.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I just love what you're doing, and I love everything you put out. It's just so high quality, and yeah,
Thank you.
Honored to be here.
Thank you so much. I've definitely been like fangirling, so.
Oh, stop.
And everyone, please, again, go ahead, support Jennifer and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you next time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.